Today I'm going to talk about the things that have been bothering Josh for the last couple of years. So he's really interested in this idea of serious games, and we're probably anyone who's done research in this area understands the challenge of the chocolate-coated broccoli. You know, this idea that it's all very well and good to say we want to create you know, this idea that we're going to create experiences that equally allow us to learn while we're having fun. What we tend to end up with instead is this kind of superficial fun, and kids pick it off. They eat the chocolate and they leave the broccoli. Do they actually really learn anything? So this is really what's been bothering Josh, poor Josh, and because it's been a problem for the last 20 years. I don't know that we've solved it yet. I think we're getting closer and we have more understanding, but it's still something that he's interested in. And I want to point out that he's interested in this from a design perspective. He wants to understand how we can help game designers to build better serious games. So he's been looking at how we understand or we balance our pedagogical intentions. So what are we trying to learn with our entertainment intentions? So how do we engage and how do we achieve that balance? And there's been a lot of work, you know, some of the early work by Malone, and then through the ages. And I guess there's a consensus that has come about, and this is where we think we should be focusing, is on this idea of how we integrate learning into core gameplay. And there's been a number of frameworks that have started to emerge, especially in the last 2 or 3 years, and we're very excited by those frameworks. And we're, well, Josh specifically has been trying to think about how his ideas integrate with some of those frameworks. So it's really this idea that we have these things that we want kids to learn, or it might be adults to learn. It can be in a training context, or it could be maths for primary school kids. And we have these game ideas. And we don't want it to be magic, you know, this idea that, oh, we had this learning objective, and, you know, the early papers were, we had this learning objective and then we had this amazing game that was going to teach it, and then we measured it. But there was no way to understand or to capture, or, you know, when an outcome was good, what was it that made that outcome good? So we're really interested into digging into the actual fundamental core mechanics of a game to see if we can understand what it is that might help us you know, anyone who plays one of these games to learn while having fun. And if we look at some of the frameworks that are out there that are emerging, we see a number of different levels that people are starting to think about this. So some people are thinking about these learning goals and how they might map to the game as a whole. So this might be what genres can be useful for learning. So puzzle games are an example. Are we best off focusing on puzzle games, or is it that puzzle games help us to learn certain types of things, whereas you know, perhaps more exploration games we might leverage those to teach literacy as an example. So there's different ways that we can think about game as a whole. We can also, or specific frameworks have started to look at different elements within games. So this idea of context, so how might we map the fantasy context to what we're trying to learn. And I think the classic example is this idea of, you know, playing darts and how we might learn mathematics as a part of that. And it's kind of, the maths is deeply embedded in this idea of playing darts. Or, you know, is it something about the storyline that helps us to achieve an educational objective? What Josh is interested in more specifically, and I think this comes from his background as a game designer, is core gameplay. So this is the moment-to-moment experiences in games, and this idea that if we get those fundamental moment-to-moment experiences right from an educational and entertainment perspective, that's going to be of real value in helping designers to design games to achieve certain learning objectives. So that's kind of the framing of his thesis work at present. The really interesting thing then that he started to think about was, and he started to talk to a whole bunch of different designers. We've got a lot of them. We've got a lot of student designers. We've got a lot of PhD students. He was talking to industry participants as well. And what he realised is even just framing learning objectives or learning goals was challenging for game designers. How were we going to think about that? So he started to think about how to frame what he sort of now calls instructional objectives, and how he could help designers to think about instructional objectives and how they might then be mapped to this moment-to-moment game play or this core gameplay. So, you know, I'm going to use the riding a bike example through the talk, because it's nice and easy to sort of hang ideas on. But so we might have an instructional objective to, to ride a bike. That's our kind of performance. That's where we want to end up. And we might want to do it in particular conditions. So we actually want to ride a bike in wet weather. I don't know why anyone would want to do that, to be honest, but clearly, you know, there are reasons you might want to do it to manage the slippery conditions, etc. And we might have criteria that we apply to that. So is it that we want to get some fluency in bike riding? We don't want to have to stop and start all the time, so we want to say, we want to be able to go 1 kilometre within 10 minutes, which actually isn't very fast. So not riding a bike very fast, but anyway. So that might be, and so what we can then end up with is a framing of an instructional objective. You know, by the end of this course, the learner will be able to ride a bike in wet conditions for 10 minutes, for 1 kilometre within 10 minutes. So. And what Josh has started to do is to work with designers to actually to see if they're able to break down ideas, because we know that, and I was at the participatory design for serious game design workshop, which was lovely, thank you for organising that, but we know that when we work with multiple stakeholders it can be really challenging, and while we have our experts in rooms to tell us about what they're trying to achieve, and Josh in multiple contexts has talked to people about what they're trying to achieve from a serious game perspective. When you're then trying to get a design or a development team to build the game, you know, you need some very concrete ideas to hang the learning on. So it's not, we just need to ride a bike, you know, how are we going to do that from a game perspective? It's actually breaking it down and I guess making the performance, the conditions and the criteria more explicit for the team, so everyone understands what's trying to be achieved. So when we were thinking about how then we might take this idea of instructional objective and translating it into, I don't know why we can't see the end of that, but anyway, and translating that into gameplay models or interaction models, we thought about the fundamentals of a gameplay experience, where basically what we're doing is we're presenting challenges to players, and then those challenges through core mechanics are making actions available to players, that they then perform those actions, they receive feedback on those actions, and new challenges are presented, or the same challenges are presented again depending on how well you did it, or a sub-component of that challenge is presented. So we were interested in thinking about that and the core mechanics that I guess translate the choices that we have when we have these challenges presented, the actions that result from those choices, the rules that are applied as part of those choices, and the feedback that we receive. We were thinking about how we might then translate that into steps that designers could use. And so we fell back on a classic kind of HCI or interaction model of thinking about action, and this is Norman's 7 stages of action, but we've specifically picked up on his 7 stages of action as design aids, where actually what he did is he translated those 7 stages of action, and I'm assuming you're all familiar with, goals to, your intentions mapped to actions, process from an environment perceived by people, and, evaluated and then coming back to your goals. So that's kind of the basic process. But what we have here is that translated into questions, and we thought, well, these questions are actually great things that we could pose to, or that designers could be posing to try and tap into these learning objectives. So what do we want to accomplish? What are our alternatives? What can I do? How do I do it? What happened? What does it mean? And is this okay? Are the kinds of ways you can think about it. So we took this idea and we sort of thought, well, we can do this for our instructional objectives, or our knowledge, skills, goals that we might have, and we can think about how those goals might then determine a choice within a game, which results in some actions, which is evaluated by rules, and results in some sort of feedback or changes. Moving on. So if we come back to our bike example, we started with these questions, and these actually, what I'm showing you is probably an end product, and doesn't necessarily reflect the iterative process that Josh went through when he worked with numbers of student design teams designing different types of serious games in order to tap into some of this translation from an instructional objective into sort of questions that they could then answer from a design perspective. So what performance should I be able to achieve? So it was ride a bike. What are the choices? You can't see that, but I'll tell you, what can I do and what are my alternatives? So I can ride a bike potentially. I could use a bike with training wheels, maybe, as an example. Maybe to start with, I'll just push the bike and become familiar with, its movement and its steering. How is the possibility of choice conveyed? So in this example, we just have different bike configurations. I can pick this bike, or I can pick the bike with training wheels, or maybe I've got Dad with me, something like that. What actions are available then? So this is, and we think about these actions in terms of verbs to indicate that I'm making a choice. So I can perhaps pedal, I can steer, I can push it, if that's what I've chosen to do. And then what kinds of rules are available? So we've got a lot of rules, and some of these are kind of optional. Some of them would make more sense in some contexts than others, but we wanted to be quite kind of encompassing with these rules. So it's things around, I guess, speed and accuracy. So how quickly do I need to make a choice? To what degree of precision? What are the criteria do I have to meet? What conditions? And what can I and can't I do? And so you can go through all of those and answer that question for bike riding. Oh, wait a minute, wrong way. And then you get some feedback. So what is the result or the new state? So I'm sitting on my bike, I'm pedaling. How do I know it's correct? Well, I haven't fallen off and I'm steady and I'm upright, but I haven't reached the end. I haven't reached my 1 kilometre, so my goal remains unchanged. I'm still riding my bike. So that's the way to think of, oh gosh, come on. Think about this. We then applied this within a specific design brief. So at QUT, like many organisations, we have to do compulsory hazard training. It's an occupational health and safety requirement, and it's really tedious. And we know that, and the occupational health and safety people know that people just flick through the slides and they do the mandatory test at the end and hope they get 5 out of 5, which is the requirement. But they want a better way to do it. So we developed an instructional objective around this. Was when presented with potential hazards in an office environment, the learner will, respond by choosing ideal control measures that could reduce the level of risk. And Josh has spent some time creating a game that applies the process, the framework that he's put in place with these questions in order to develop what the game's called catastrophe, because clearly it's quite dramatic So I'm not going to go through all of the kind of different ways that he's applied the rules. I don't have time, but you can read about those in the paper. But I will give you one example. So the example is, what can I do and what are my alternatives if we're thinking about choice. And so in this context, the learning required us to know, or requires staff at QUT to know, how to clean up different hazards, and what are my choices? Should I eliminate the hazard? Should I substitute it? Should I isolate it? Should I call engineering to fix it? So the way he thought about this is, we needed to have people to be able to choose between at least two or three meaningful control measures for various situations within the play environment. How were these possibilities of choice conveyed? Well, if you sort of hovered over something, you would see a choice, and it would also give you a tip as to what that might mean. So this is a choice where we have slippery tiles, and we might need to think about substituting those. So there was a range of different experiences that mapped to these different control choices. So that's just one example. So in summary, what we've ended up with so far, or what the point that Josh has got to, is we think we've got a pretty solid framework that provides a clear process to map these instructional objectives to core gameplay activity. He's thought very carefully about how it fits with, I guess, those higher level frameworks, and we think that this is a framework that will work alongside that, and it allows designers to systematically design core gameplay. So as I mentioned, he's currently using the framework, and it's being applied across a number of different projects, and he's evaluating those projects as a part of his PhD. And the other thing we're doing is, he's just finished, and he just emailed me and told me he's collected enough data. I hope he's right, because it's taken some time to evaluate this hazard management game. So what we're doing is, we're taking the original version, we're taking the game, we're measuring enjoyment using the IMI, we're measuring learning using some video clips of identifying different hazards. So that's where we're at. We're hoping to present that work next year, and we look forward to that. So any questions? I think you could ask Josh. I can probably answer some of the questions if anyone has any.